The NBA trade deadline has passed. Teams did their best to reshuffle their rosters to either try and push them over the hump to compete for a title, while others sold off a good portion of their assets to accelerate their tanking effort. And then, of course, some teams just stood pat, rolling with what they've got for the remainder of the season. A flurry of trades, a lot of player movement. The Bucks deciding not to trade Giannis for now, and we'll revisit in the offseason. The Grizzlies not able to trade Ja Morant despite moving on from Jaren Jackson Jr. and signaling a full-blown rebuild. But just like any trade deadline, we all like to play the armchair GM and analyze and critique every trade, who came out ahead, who got the short end of the stick. And while I won't be going through every trade that was made at the deadline, I will be going over some of the biggest winners and losers of this year's trade deadline, and you guys let me know if you agree or disagree. This video is brought to you by Topps. So if you caught my last video where I introduced Topps, now you guys know that I've been getting back into card collecting, something that was once a big hobby of mine as a kid, and it's in large part because of Topps Now and their cards that capture the biggest NBA moments throughout the season. Topps Now are trading cards that drop the day after games, capturing the biggest NBA moments. So after a big moment, a play, or a stat line, Topps could list a card for sale the next day. Collectors order the card and receive it in the mail once it's been printed. And guess what? I finally got my cards in the mail, the ones that I purchased from the site in my last video. Let's take a look. All right, let's take a look at what we got here. We got our Topps cards that have just come in the mail. Wow, nice in its own case. Look at that. Let's flip these open. Nice in its little sleeve here. Look at that. This one is the LeBron James Royal Flush Monster Reverse Jam. That was on 12/28. Individually numbered. One is probably the Scotty Barnes one, right? Yeah. There it is. Scotty Barnes, first in franchise history with 2020-10 game. Here are some of the other ones that have sold in the past as well to give you an idea of some of the key moments. Check out more insane NBA Topps Now moments on Topps.com, link in the description. Let me know which cards you guys end up choosing, and thanks to Topps for sponsoring this video. Now, I always have to preface these types of videos when it comes to trade transactions that were just made, that it is premature to say who won or lost in a given trade, because we ultimately don't know how said trade is going to impact the teams involved until 1 or 2, 3 years out from now, sometimes even more. And so when talking through some of the winners and losers of the deadline, we're going based off of the immediate impact and how we think this is going to transpire, not only for now, but going forward. And I'm going to start with some of the winners of the deadline. The first team, I believe, walked away with a great return. Probably one of the biggest surprises, someone I would not have thought would walk away as winners, but that's the LA Clippers. Look, I know the Clippers were starting to turn the season around after they got off to that horrendous 6-21 start, and knowing they were shipping off their pick to the Thunder as part of the Paul George trade all those years ago. And so for the Clippers, you might say, well, how were they winners? They just traded Harden. They traded Zubats just when they were on the right path to make a playoff push. The reality is they weren't going to be competing for a title. Maybe they would have made the playoffs, but at best, they would have been a first-round exit to the Thunder or the Nuggets. Let's be real. The Clippers are the oldest team in the league. They're constantly injured. They don't control much of their draft picks. They're over the luxury tax. And so the fact that the Clippers were able to walk away from the deadline, recognizing that this team has run its course, and not only getting rid of James Harden, who has been great for them this season, but I think we all know wasn't going to get them where they needed to be, especially at his age. They got rid of Harden, but also were able to bring in a much younger point guard who has his flaws. He has his injuries concerns, don't get me wrong, but a former all-star point guard who is a decade younger in Darius Garland, and they got another younger guard in Benedict Mathurin, and 2 first-round picks from the Pacers is the perfect start to kicking off a new era, a path to rebuilding. Those picks from the Pacers are valuable too. One was a pick from this year's draft, which is top 4 protected and protected outside of the top 10, which is a little strange. I don't think I've ever seen a pick protection like that, but essentially they'll get the pick if it falls between 5 and 9, where there is a chance that could happen based on the Pacers' current standing and all those teams, bottom teams, hovering around the same record right now. If it doesn't convey, though, it then becomes an unprotected pick in 2031. And then the other pick the Pacers sent them was an unprotected pick in 2029, which, okay, sure, the Pacers are expected to be good for quite some time starting next season with Halliburton returning, but a lot of things can happen between now and then where that pick could end up being very valuable. I'm sure the Clippers will look to trade Kawhi Leonard in the offseason, who has one more year left on his contract after this year, and fully embrace the rebuild at that point. But given the stated despair of the Clippers and how bleak their future looked at the beginning of the season, this was a great win for them to come ahead and start looking towards the future. Another team that also opted to start tearing things down and starting a new chapter for their franchise that I consider to be a winner of the deadline was the Memphis Grizzlies, and it's mainly because of the haul they got for Jaren Jackson Jr. I think it was an L. They took an L by not being able to trade Ja Morant, but I also get it. Ja has negative trade value with the league right now, especially on that contract of his, and you don't want to send out assets, future assets, just to get him off your books when you're trying to accumulate assets for the future. But the haul they got for Jaren Jackson Jr., that was unexpected. I mean, we all know Jackson is a great player, one of the top defenders in the game, but is also a strong offensive player who has really developed his shooting over the years. But getting 3 first-round picks for him, coming from the Jazz, one of them being a pick in 2031, that's actually the Suns' unprotected pick that could hold a lot of value at that time. One of them is the Jazz' own pick in 2027, or at least the most favorable between them, the Cavs, and the Timberwolves. And are we sure the Jazz are no longer going to be a lottery team starting next season? There is a world where the Grizzlies get a lottery pick next year from the Jazz for Jaren Jackson Jr. Jaren Jackson Jr.'s contract too, I mean, he just signed an extension, has 4 more seasons on his deal after this one at a near max contract where he's making over $50 million. I'm shocked the Grizzlies were able to get 3 first-round picks for him, even just because of that contract alone. They also acquired a couple second-round picks and some other small deals. Of course, they got all those picks from the Magic and the Desmond Bane trade. So yeah, I like what the Grizzlies did. They sold high on their current core players and maximized their value as much as they could. Another winner from the deadline, and yes, I realize I'm biased a bit here, but that's the Timberwolves, and it's mainly because of their addition of Ayo Dosunmu, without having to give up that much to get him either. I don't know how the Bulls weren't able to extract more value from one of their most valuable trade chips as their best two-way player, but I'll save that discussion for my losers at the deadline. But the Timberwolves landing a solid rotational player, 6th man of the year candidate, plays his tail off, incredibly smart on both ends of the floor, is having the most efficient season of his career, putting up 51, 45, 85 shooting splits, is one of the quickest players in getting downhill and finishing transition, and all they had to do was give up 4 second-round picks and Rob Dillingham, who I know some will say, well, that's a big get for the Bulls, former lottery pick from last year's draft, only 21 years old, a lot of upside there. I said on my Bulls channel, I don't see the upside with Dillingham. I think he's too small, not a good enough shooter, can't defend, and I don't think he will last long in the league. So the fact that the Timberwolves were able to turn him around and some not valuable second-round picks to get the perfect complement for their roster to help them in their push to win a title was huge for the Timberwolves. Now, let's talk about some of the losers. And of course, I gotta start with my Chicago Bulls. I'll try not to go into too much on this one because I did a whole video on the Bulls' failed trade deadline on my Bulls channel, Bulls Central. But for the Bulls, I don't see how you can walk away from the deadline with all the moves they made and say, yeah, this makes sense. Trading for all these guards, all these high-volume scoring guards that don't play defense, don't have much value on the trade market if you're trying to flip them down the line, all of them on expiring contracts, so it's very likely you could lose some of them in free agency unless you want to execute a sign and trade. I like the trade for Jaden Ivey because all they had to do was give up Kevin Huerter. Ivey is a high upside player, former number 5 overall pick. The Vucevic trade was okay, mainly because of the high second-round pick they got in exchange in that deal, not as much as far as acquiring Simons in his expiring contract. The rest of the trades is where I was just baffled, just accumulating a bunch of second-round picks and more guards for Ayo Dosunmu and Kobe White, 2 players who arguably carried the most trade value on that team. The Bulls, after all these years of having Caruso, Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, Vucevic, Kobe, Ayo, couldn't amass a single first-round pick in any of those transactions outside of 1 first-round pick they got back that was their own in the deal for Zach LaVine. That's it. They approached this deadline with throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks and just hoping they can get lucky in the lottery or that one of those guys turns into something, or at least turns into something that they can try and flip for more value. Just baffling to me. The Bulls definitely were one of the losers at the deadline. Another loser, the Miami Heat, and it's really because of their lack of moves. The Miami Heat are mid. They're a mid team right now, and they've been mid for a while. They made a nice trade in the offseason to land Norman Powell, but they're still sitting in the play-in territory in the East. And every year, every trade deadline or offseason, we always hear about how the Heat are one of the front runners to land X superstar. They were the front runners to acquire Dame, didn't get him. They were supposed to be at the top of the list to land Kevin Durant back when he was requesting a trade from Brooklyn, didn't get him. And now, of course, being one of the front runners to land a top 5 player in the league in Giannis, and they could not get a deal done. And I get it, the Bucks shut down all talks of trading Giannis because they know they can likely get better offers for him in the offseason, but the Heat's offer isn't going to get much better in the offseason compared to some of the other teams like the Warriors, Timberwolves, Knicks. This was their chance to make an all-in move, mortgage as much of their future as they can, and they didn't do it. And it's one thing to say, all right, whatever, we missed on Giannis, but what else can you do to make this team better? Because it's currently constructed, they're not going to be good enough to make a deep playoff run. What's the end game here? Yeah, bad deadline for the Miami Heat. And then one of the other bigger losers, also because of the lack of moves, has to be the Houston Rockets. The Rockets looked great to start the season. Their offense was cooking, defense was solid, but things have kind of fallen off a little bit. The offense looks a little clunkier. It's a lot more heavy isolation balls, selfish hero basketball, and it's pretty clear that if they really want to, truly want to contend in the stacked Western Conference, and also knowing that their window to win with Kevin Durant is limited given he's 37 years old, the time to make a move was now, especially after the injury to Steven Adams and, of course, being without Fred VanVleet all season. And they stood pat. They had 5 tradable first-round picks, a lot of young and intriguing talent that could have enticed teams to bring in win-now talent, and they didn't do anything. I still maintain they could have gone all in on Giannis, and the Bucks would have taken the offer. They could have traded all 5 of their tradable first-round picks, the contracts of Dorian Finney-Smith, Fred VanVleet, and maybe included Reed Shepherd and Tari Eason as the intriguing young players to get the Bucks to bite. But not only did they not get Giannis, but they couldn't land a strong scoring guard like a Kobe White, who I think would have been a perfect fit for them. Nothing. And don't get me wrong, I still think the Rockets are a good team. They're currently 4th in the Western Conference, albeit only 1 game out of the play-in, but I don't see this team having a legitimate shot at winning the championship. And when you know you're on the final years of Kevin Durant's prime, a player they traded for, knowing this by the way, you have to go all in leveling up this team, especially when you know Giannis is available. So anyway, those were some of my biggest winners and losers of this year's NBA trade deadline. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.